You think World War II was won by aircraft carriers? Think again. In early 1943, Australia, MacArthur's vital staging area, was starving. Cut off. Its defense hinged on a single, invisible lifeline. A lifeline the Japanese were strangling. But then, one man, aboard one steel cylinder, broke every rule, penetrated the most fortified sea lanes on Earth, and launched a one-man war that didn't just sink ships, it fundamentally changed the course of the Pacific War. This is the story of Mush, Morton, and the USS Wahoo. And how his impossible, 14-day rampage saved a continent. To fully grasp the magnitude of Commander Dudley Morton's actions, we must first immerse ourselves in the brutal strategic reality of the Pacific in late 1942. This was a war of logistics waged across the largest, most unforgiving ocean on Earth. The front lines, Guadalcanal, New Guinea, were mere extensions of a monumental supply chain that began on the docks of San Francisco and Seattle. The primary objective for the United States in the Southwest Pacific was the establishment and defense of Australia as a colossal staging ground. General Douglas MacArthur had narrowly secured this base, but the continent was utterly dependent on American imports. Every drop of aviation fuel, every shell fired by the Marines, every medical supply, and indeed, the very food that sustained the Allied forces, all had to cross over 8,000 miles of open ocean. This logistical feat was a marathon, but the final mile was a deadly sprint. The Japanese High Command understood this vulnerability perfectly. Their strategy was not to invade Australia outright, but to strangle its lifeline. The Japanese strategy centered on the massive stronghold of Rabaul, located on the island of New Britain. Rabaul was not merely a base. It was a self-sustaining, multi-layered fortress built into a natural harbor, the Gibraltar of the Pacific. It boasted 5 major airfields, protected by hundreds of aircraft, vast anti-aircraft arrays, and tens of thousands of hardened troops. For the Japanese, Rabaul was the central hub for their entire war machine in the south. Critically, Rabaul dominated 2 essential arteries, the sea lanes leading south to the Solomons, and the main logistical conduit that ran southwest to the forward Japanese bases in New Guinea, particularly around Wewak and La. This latter route, the Wewak-Rabaul supply artery, was the aorta of the Japanese defensive perimeter. Every troop transport, every tanker carrying fuel from Borneo, and every freighter laden with engineering supplies and ammunition was funneled through the Bismarck Sea, directly past Rabaul's immense power. If this Japanese artery flowed freely, MacArthur's push into New Guinea would be choked off. If it could be severed, the entire Japanese defensive line would collapse from starvation. The problem for the Allies was that the U.S. Navy's dedicated weapon against this logistical menace, the submarine fleet, was failing dramatically. The failure was not one of courage, but of technology and doctrine, and institutional oversight so profound it threatened to lose the entire strategic war. The American submarine of 1942, the Gatto-class ***, was a magnificent machine. It was robust, had a deep diving capability, and possessed the long legs necessary to traverse the Pacific. It was, physically, the perfect hunter. But the Gatto was armed with 2 fatal defects, one technical, one philosophical. The philosophical defect was doctrine. The older generation of submarine commanders, trained in the cautious interwar Navy, viewed the submarine as a reconnaissance tool, a weapon of opportunity that prioritized stealth and self-preservation above all else. Attacks were rigid, a single, deep-running shot to avoid detection, followed by an immediate dive to the bottom. Aggression was discouraged, survival was paramount. This approach, while safe, resulted in low kill totals, allowing massive Japanese convoys to bleed through the blockade. The technical defect, however, was the most lethal betrayal, the Mark 14 torpedo. The Mark 14 was the pride of the Naval Ordnance Department, a 21-foot-long technological marvel that promised to deliver a devastating blow. It contained 3 critical, maddening flaws, each independently capable of running an attack. 1. Depth control failure ***. Despite factory specifications, the torpedoes consistently ran an average of 10 feet deeper than the set depth. This flaw meant the magnetic exploder, designed to detonate under the ship's keel for maximum effect, passed harmlessly beneath the target's hull. The crew would watch a perfect shot result only in a distant wake, and the enemy sailed on. 2. Contact pistol failure *. If a torpedo somehow corrected its depth and hit the target directly, the contact fuse often simply failed to detonate. It would hit the side of a freighter with a resounding thud and then break apart, or simply embed itself, an inert piece of metal. 3. Magnetic exploder failure *. The ingenious magnetic exploder, meant to sense the ship's magnetic field and detonate beneath the keel, frequently malfunctioned, sometimes causing the torpedo to circle back dangerously toward the launching submarine, or simply fail to arm altogether. The result of this institutional arrogance, the Ordnance Department's refusal to believe the combat reports of their own captains, was a staggering loss of opportunity. Patrols returned from the front lines with frustrated, furious reports. "We hit him 5 times, Captain, and nothing. 5 perfect shots, 5 duds." Morale plummeted. The submarine fleet, the strategic key to crippling Japan's logistics, was operating with a weapon that simply did not work. The Japanese supply flow continued, largely unchecked, strangling Australia slowly but surely. The USS Wahoo, SS-238, was, ironically, the perfect canvas for a revolution. She was a lemon. A failure. Her first 2 commanding officers had achieved almost nothing. Her third patrol was a textbook case of Mark 14 failure near truck, where multiple perfect shots resulted in 0 kills. The Wahoo limped back to port with an empty logbook and a reputation as the most unlucky, cursed, submarine in the fleet. The crew was demoralized, anxious, and deeply frustrated. But in late 1942, the desperate Pacific Fleet Command, recognizing the need for radical change, took a massive gamble. They assigned the Wahoo to the most aggressive, unpredictable firebrand they had, Lieutenant Commander Dudley Walker Morton. His name was Dudley Walker Morton, but he was universally known as Mush. Born in 1907, Morton was a charismatic, magnetic leader who possessed a disdain for rigid dogma that bordered on insubordination. He saw the bureaucracy that protected the failed torpedo program as the true enemy. Morton viewed the submarine as a pure killing machine, and his personal philosophy was a devastatingly simple tactical mantra. When in doubt, shoot. When not in doubt, shoot again. When Morton arrived at the Wahoo, the vessel was scheduled for routine overhaul. Morton didn't waste a second on tradition or comfort. He focused on 2 objectives: fixing the Wahoo's weapons and forging a crew that would execute his lethal vision. Morton's first act was his most consequential and most audacious. He partnered with his new executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Richard H. O'Kane, who would later become one of the greatest submarine aces of the war himself. Together, they launched a technical mutiny. They refused to trust the official reports coming from naval ordnance. Instead, they personally oversaw the testing of every single Mark 14 torpedo aboard the Wahoo. They took 1 torpedo, fired it into a designated shallow test range, and then, using the limited equipment available, physically measured its true running depth. The results confirmed the maddening combat reports. The torpedoes were running 9 to 12 feet deeper than the depth set on the control panel. This flaw, known and ignored by the leadership back home, was now acknowledged and fixed by 2 men in the cramped, oily torpedo room of a single submarine. Morton and O'Kane ordered the torpedo crews to manually compensate for this defect by setting the controls to a depth 10 feet shallower than the actual desired depth. If they wanted the torpedo to hit at 6 feet, they set it to -4. This simple act, disobeying official ordnance guidance based purely on battlefield experience, was a foundational change. It ensured that, for the first time, a Wahoo torpedo would have a predictable flight path and would actually strike a ship where it was vulnerable, at the waterline. This was the moment the Wahoo stopped being a failure and started being a precision instrument of death. The technical fix was only half the battle. Morton had to eradicate the psychological timidity that plagued the early submarine fleet. He replaced the old, cautious thinking with a new, aggressive doctrine. This was the Morton Doctrine, a complete rejection of reconnaissance and stealth in favor of maximum lethality and sustained combat. 1. Aggression at all costs, attack from the surface. Morton recognized that the submarine's greatest defensive asset was not its ability to hide, but its speed. The Gado class could run on its powerful diesel engines at over 20 knots on the surface, faster than most Japanese freighters and even some escorts. Morton decreed that the Wahoo would use this speed. By staying on the surface until the very last moment, the Wahoo gained speed, maneuverability, and the ability to reload the stern tubes far faster than if submerged deep. He turned the submarine into a destroyer that could dive. 2. Decisive force, fire the full salvo. The old doctrine required conservation, fire 1 or 2 torpedoes, then flee. Morton replaced this with a philosophy of absolute destruction. His order was to fire all 6 bow tubes at a single target to guarantee a kill, regardless of the torpedo supply. This was a psychological shift. They were not to conserve ordnance. The mission was to sink ships. A dead ship required no second attack. 3. The hunt for destruction, no partial victories. If a target was struck but not immediately sunk, Morton would pursue it relentlessly. He would not leave a crippled ship to be towed to port for repair. He would resurface, chase the target down, reload, and fire again until the vessel was undeniably on the bottom. He accepted nothing less than complete, certain victory. Morton ran his crew through relentless, terrifying drills. The drills were not about escaping depth charges. They were about the rapid-fire, surface chase reloading sequence. The atmosphere inside the boat shifted. The fear of being sunk was replaced by the exhilarating anticipation of the hunt. The accursed Wahoo was reborn as a weapon of sheer, uncompromising aggression. On January 16, 1943, the USS Wahoo slipped out of Pearl Harbor, bound for the most dangerous waters in the Pacific. Morton was not aiming for safe hunting grounds. He was driving his submarine straight into the Japanese heartland, the heavily patrolled, critical Rabaul supply artery in the Bismarck Sea. The journey to the operational zone was a study in controlled tension. The crew, still deeply conditioned by the Mark XIV's failures and the Old Navy's caution, watched their captain closely. Morton didn't change his demeanor. He projected absolute, unwavering confidence, a force multiplier that was more effective than any armor. The cramped confines of the Gado-class submarine, barely 30 feet wide, magnified every smell of diesel, sweat, and frying food. The rhythmic thrum of the huge diesel engines became the heartbeat of a crew anticipating battle. Morton was not just hunting ships, he was hunting the enemy's sense of security. He was about to shatter the Japanese assumption that their main supply lanes were safe from effective attack. The morning of January 24, 1943, delivered the inevitable confrontation. The Wahoo was operating near Wewak, New Guinea, when sonar detected a convoy. 2 freighters, both loaded to the absolute gunnels with supplies and reinforcements destined for the New Guinea front, escorted by a single, cautious Japanese destroyer. This was the logistical backbone of the enemy's war effort, moving through protected waters. Morton ordered, "Battle stations! Prepare to fire all bow tubes!" The plan, executed at periscope depth to maintain speed and line of sight, was pure Morton, direct, aggressive, and overwhelming. He lined up on the lead transport, the 47-ton Biomaru. The silence in the torpedo room was suffocating. Every man remembered the failures of the past. The commands were sharp. Tube 1, fire! Tube 2, fire! Tube 3, fire! 6 torpedoes surged from the bow, aimed at a tight spread designed to rip the freighter's side open and guarantee a breach beyond repair. These were the fixed torpedoes, set by the crew's own labor to hit the waterline. Then came the sound that changed the Pacific War, not a dull thud, but 3 distinct, massive, tearing explosions. The force of the detonation was clearly audible inside the Wahoo. The Biomaru, carrying a mix of Japanese troops and, tragically, a large contingent of Indian prisoners of war, immediately began to settle. Smoke and steam billowed. The ship was doomed. The sinking of the first ship would have been a successful patrol for many early war commanders. But for Morton, it was only the start of the engagement. This was the Morton doctrine in action. Morton ignored the destroyer, which was confused and distracted by the sinking of the lead freighter. He immediately surged the Wahoo forward, maneuvering for a shot at the second freighter, the Fukai Maru. The destroyer was now desperately trying to locate the source of the attack, its sonar beams sweeping frantically. Morton, recognizing the Japanese escort's hesitation, ordered the stern tubes armed and fired 2 more torpedoes at the second freighter. The Fukai Maru was struck, crippled, and soon listing dramatically. In a matter of minutes, the USS Wahoo had sunk over 10,000 tons of vital Japanese shipping in enemy-controlled waters. The psychological effect on the crew was instantaneous. The curse was broken. The Wahoo was a killer. Over the next 2 weeks, the Bismarck Sea became the personal hunting ground of Dudley Morton. He was relentless, crisscrossing the sea lanes, often attacking multiple targets in the same 24-hour period. He refused to waste time hiding deep. He would surface immediately after an attack to escape detection by air patrols and, critically, to begin the long, arduous process of reloading the torpedo tubes faster. The logbook of the Wahoo became a terrifying testament to his philosophy. He sank the 6,000-ton freighter Zenko Maru. He dispatched a small patrol vessel with his deck gun, a brazen, terrifying action that exposed his submarine to immediate danger but guaranteed the kill. By the end of this patrol, the Wahoo had sunk or crippled 7 Japanese ships in rapid succession. The cumulative damage to the Japanese logistical flow was catastrophic. The flow of fuel and reinforcements to New Guinea began to slow. Then came the incident that defined the cold, brutal calculus of total war that Morton embraced. After sinking the Biomaru, the Wahoo surfaced to observe the sinking. The lookouts reported hundreds of men in the water, Japanese soldiers, but also the tragic sight of Allied Indian prisoners of war. As the Wahoo watched, an armed Japanese lifeboat began approaching the scene. Morton, having received numerous reports that the Japanese often disguised armed soldiers as helpless survivors to lure American submarines to the surface and ambush them, made a calculated, horrifying decision. He ordered the deck guns manned and opened fire, machine-gunning the survivors in the water. This act, controversial and dark, speaks volumes about Morton's focus. The mission was the total destruction of enemy fighting capability, not mercy. He recorded in the Wahoo's log, *, sunk Japanese transport. Fired on personnel in the water who refused to abandon ship or who were manning lifeboats. This incident was widely debated, but it cemented Morton's image as an aggressor who accepted no moral ambiguity in pursuit of victory. The sheer scale of destruction achieved by one American submarine operating inside the Japanese-controlled Bismarck Sea sent a shockwave through the Japanese High Command. They didn't see one submarine. They saw a wolf pack of hyper-aggressive, deadly accurate American vessels swarming their protected waters. The impossible had happened. The American torpedoes were working, and the American captains had thrown out the cautious rulebook. The strategic response was immediate and immense. 1. Supply route diversion * Japanese Naval Command immediately diverted their vital supply convoys hundreds of miles to the north, forcing them to use circuitous, time-consuming routes that added days and significant logistical complexity to their delivery schedules. The critical Rabaul artery had been effectively severed by one captain's audacity. 2. Rabaul starvation * The immediate effect on the Japanese forces fighting in New Guinea was disastrous. The fortress of Rabaul and its forward bases began to feel the pinch of strategic starvation. The flow of fuel and ammunition that was essential to resisting MacArthur's counterattack slowed to a trickle, severely weakening the Japanese defensive capacity. 3. The lifeline secured * for the Allies, the relief was palpable. By severing the Japanese aorta, the Wahoo dramatically reduced the pressure on the Australian supply lanes. The flow of American men and material into the Southwest Pacific gained the necessary security and speed to sustain the offensive. Morton's rampage secured the logistical foundation that was absolutely essential for the eventual push back toward the Philippines and beyond. Morton's logbook, with its aggressive language and detailed accounts of sinking ships one after the other, became required reading for every single American submarine commander. He provided the proof, the quantifiable data, that the technical defects of the Mark 14 could be overcome and that the cautious interwar doctrine must be discarded. He injected a necessary spirit of aggression into a flagging fleet. Morton completed 4 more patrols aboard the Wahoo after the Bismarck Sea triumph, cementing his place as one of the war's greatest submarine aces. But the fate of the aggressor is often violent. On October 11, 1943, on the Wahoo's 7th patrol, operating in the highly dangerous, shallow waters of the La Perouse Strait, deep inside enemy territory, the submarine was ambushed by a concentrated Japanese air and sea patrol. The USS Wahoo was trapped by the relentless enemy forces and sunk with all hands. Dudley Mush Morton died the way he fought, deep in enemy territory, driving his boat to the absolute limit, pursuing a target. The legacy of Dudley Morton and the USS Wahoo is not found merely in the tonnage they sank. It is found in the fundamental change in doctrine and the surge of confidence they provided a struggling fleet. By proving that the submarines could be effective, Morton ensured the aggressive tactics he pioneered became the standard operating procedure that ultimately decimated the entire Japanese merchant fleet and won the crucial, grinding war of logistics in the Pacific. His 2-week rampage in the Bismarck Sea didn't just save a handful of convoys. It secured the logistical foundation of the war effort that eventually led to VJ Day. The USS Wahoo sits today at the bottom of the Pacific, a silent, steel testament to a captain who threw out the cautious rulebook, fixed his weapon with his own hands, and launched a one-man war that secured the lifeline of a continent. A single steel cylinder, a single fearless captain, and the day the fate of Australia was decided underwater. The audacity of the submarine force, now known as the Silent Service, was forged in the fire of Mush Morton's aggression.